colleagues, welcome to today's session. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Today, it's not about me, it's about what we're actually talking about, which is the concluding part of the session we had 2 weeks ago, which speaks about identifying learners and subject for intervention. Trishen is going to be sharing best practices.
Thank you, Ike. Am I clear, audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good day, colleagues. My name is Trishen Maraj. I'm an assessment official in the intermediate phase at Sedibeng East District in Gauteng. This is a best practice or sharing of best practice follow-up from the session that we had 2 weeks ago, where we identified learners at risk, or how do we identify learners at risk. And then today's session is basically, now that we've identified those learners at risk, how do we support them? What can we do to support them? I'm going to be going into a lot of back to basics, and I will be stressing and repeating myself a lot. I see that there are some attendees that attended yesterday as well. I'm going to be speaking about the same information that was discussed yesterday. So you'll see that as an attendee, you might already know exactly what I am about to say. You might have more information, more in-depth information, but I want to keep the session basic, especially for those schools that or officials that really need insight on how do we support learners at risk. So bear with me, please. Just a reminder that this is a national webinar, so there might be things said that is only maybe applicable to Gauteng, but I think in this session, supporting learners at risk is a national, let's call it a national action, and it's very important. So in beginning this session, I want to recap as an introduction to what was discussed 2 weeks ago. And that was, how did we identify learners at risk at our district last year when we were hit with COVID. Now, remember, in Gauteng province, we have what is called a possible retention schedule or learners at risk process, which was retracted by provincial officers of the department last year. But we as a district, we decided as assessment officials in GET that we still want to have a system in place to identify learners at risk based on exactly what is being experienced in schools at that point in time. And we've identified 5 criteria that we used, and we shared that with schools so that they can identify those learners at risk. And very quickly, those 5 criteria were: number 1, the learners that did not meet the requirements in the previous year. So in 2019, any learner that didn't meet the promotion requirements in their phase are identified as learners at risk. The second criteria, which was the progress learners. Who are the learners that were progressed from 2019 to 2020? Based on whatever reason. Now, there were 4 categories that I spoke about, or subcategories. And that was progress due to age cohort, progress due to number of years in grade, progress due to number of years in phase. And then the last one, which was new to us as foundation and intermediate phase, was progress due to adjustments and or continuation. The third criteria that we used to identify learners at risk was the fact that if a learner on a term schedule, or be it in any formal task that is part of the SBA or the year mark, promotion mark decision, provided that learner achieves a -1, that learner must be identified as a learner at risk because of the academic gap that he or she had missed during that task. The fourth one was approved comorbidities. If a school could prove that there were approved comorbidities at the school, where the learners or the parents applied and the school approved and were providing that school with the resource packs on a biweekly basis. That learner is regarded or was regarded as a learner at risk due to the fact that he or she did not have a face-to-face interaction on a daily basis or on an alternate day basis with the subject teacher. And then the last one was any newly admitted learner. Any learner that was admitted to the school during the current academic year was regarded as a learner at risk. And all of these criteria, all the learners that fall under these criteria were regarded as learners at risk up until the end of the year when the promotion schedule is printed. So in a nutshell, that is my introduction, basically overview of what we discussed 2 weeks ago. Now, in part 2 today, I mentioned earlier that I want to go to basics and I want to discuss why do we support learners at risk and then how do we support them. We must understand that we need to understand why we need to do something. When do we need to do it? And how do we need to do it? And we can't support learners at risk if we don't have learners at risk. So now that we have those learners at risk, we know who they are. Why do we support them? Number one, colleagues, as young as you are in the education sector, as old as you are in the education sector, or not, let's say not old, as experienced as you are in the education sector, we are here for the love of the child. We are here to support kids. Not to say that we want them all to pass, but we want to be in a position where we know wholeheartedly that we have done everything in our power, in our subject, to support those kids, to teach them, to assess them, to give them every possibility to meet the requirements in that particular subject so that they can pass on their own merit. We are not in education for a salary. We are here because it is a calling. And I think it is important that whoever we are, we need to remember that, especially when we are dealing with these learners at risk. The second reason as to why is because as a teacher, as an HOD, as a deputy principal, a district official, a provincial official, we don't want to have that underperforming status against our name. So it's important that when we identify these learners at risk, we plan to support them. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail with regards to that planning. We can't just identify learners and support them without planning. I used an example yesterday to say, you cannot diagnose a patient if you're a doctor unless you know 100% that what you are diagnosing that patient with is the root cause of their illness. So no matter how much of medication and how many times that patient comes to you, if they are not appropriately diagnosed, they will never get better. So I want you to think about that example figuratively. The third reason that we support learners at risk is because as a school, as a district, as a province, we want to make sure that our systems are in place, our basics are in place. And that's what I'm going to speak about just now. We need to understand that if our basics are in place in terms of planning, executing teaching and learning activities within the classroom, knowing our duties, executing our duties, nothing extra, just what is part of our job description, then we will automatically limit the number of appeal cases that might hit our desk come the end of the year. So those are the three reasons that as to why we support learners at risk. There are more, but these are the three that I want to bring to your attention. How do we support learners at risk? Colleagues, there's no textbook. You are the teacher in the classroom. You know those kids. Only you can identify the challenge that is experienced by that kid in your class. Hence, only you can determine what intervention you're going to use to support that child. How long will it take? Or whose help do you need? That question can only be answered by the person on the ground, not by the district official, not by the provincial official. And if you're at a provincial level or a district level, it means that only at your level do you understand what it is required for you to also do in supporting your schools to support their learners. So we all need to understand exactly what our job descriptions are and execute only the minimum, just those minimum. Because you'll see that everything I'm going to discuss today, it's nothing far-fetched. It's merely going to be a refresher for some of us. And for others, it's going to be new. So basics, when I say basics, how do we support them? Colleagues, we know that we have recovery ATPs and POAs, annual teaching plans, and program of assessments in every subject. Now, those are the documents that we need to learn by heart so that we can plan for our lessons. We don't need to try and be fancy. We need to keep it simple because our time is very limited with these kids, especially if there are still schools, a lot of schools on alternate day timetables, even though the president has said that he wants 100% attendance every day. We know it's impossible. So study your ATPs, study your POAs, teach what you are supposed to teach. Try not to go too far, or don't try to overexert knowledge onto the kids in front of you. Don't try to overassess. You are teaching to assess. It is not teaching for assessment. That is the focus that we are currently using. So remember that. Syllabi completion is not a race. We understand that schools are very different. We are experiencing different things which may hinder our completion of our syllabus. So if you are teaching and you find, listen, there's a problem in this subject in terms of this particular topic, stop the bus. Reteach if you have to. So when you submit your syllabi completion to district and to province, it must be authentic. So we know that you have a challenge that you are experiencing at your school or your district. So you can be supported. It's like a kid in your class. If the kid doesn't speak up to say, ma'am, sir, I have a problem, I don't understand a certain thing, will you really know that the child doesn't know or understand what you are teaching him or her until the formal test is written when it's too late? So colleagues, study those documents. You get brilliant educators that assess really, really good tasks. But you get those that in assessing those tasks, where it's supposed to be a test, they set an assignment. When it's supposed to be an assignment, they set an investigation. So they're not following what they're supposed to follow. Back to basics. Try not to be too creative. Stick to the basics. Plan for your lesson. We know that if you walk into a class and you are unprepared for a lesson, those kids, they know, and they will take full advantage of that. The only time you can keep discipline within a class and actually get the full academic potential out of that lesson is if you are fully prepared for that lesson. So plan in advance. Make sure that you have a lesson structure. Make sure there's evidence of teaching and learning activities. Make sure that there's evidence of actually giving feedback to learners in the class. And I'm going to go further in this session. I'm going to speak about how you're going to do that, or how is it expected of you to do that. So in a nutshell, colleagues, that is where I want to start. And then moving forward, there's two documents that I want to speak about today in terms of, now that I've identified learners at risk, what can I use to plan so that before I implement my interventions, I need to plan. Now, the two documents that I'm talking about, they are called ISPs and SIPs. Now, ISPs are individual support plans, and SIPs is not the school improvement plan. It's the subject improvement plan in this case. So in terms of individual learners, you will draft a simple, structured, as it's reflected on the slide, a table with 4 columns to say, this is my individual support plan for Mr. Maraj, or let's call him Jacob. The learner is Jacob. What's important to understand is, this is a basic example. Remember, I'm doing best practice. I don't want to go into detail. I'm trying to assist you as best I can in planning before you even implement your interventions. So if Jacob is in a maths class, grade 4, and Jacob is struggling with multiplication, then my identified challenge as the educator completing this individual support plan for Jacob, the challenge is multiplication. As an intervention, there are various things that I, as an educator, can plot to assist Jacob. Now, I will give you examples a little later. But what I want you to understand is this. When you identify a challenge for Jacob, you might note 10 interventions. I know, and you are not a machine. You're a human being. So prioritize your intervention in terms of the challenge that you've identified. It's the same with the challenge. For Jacob, that poor child, you might identify 10 challenges. Prioritize those challenges so that you are not inundated in supporting these learners. The second thing I want to speak about when you are planning using these documents is that the intervention must speak to the challenge. For example, if you say, my challenge is multiplication, Jacob doesn't understand multiplication, and your intervention linked to that challenge is extra classes after school. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Mr. Maraj is the teacher. Is Mr. Maraj going to be giving those extra classes at the end of the day? Jacob didn't understand what Mr. Maraj was saying in multiplication during the lesson. What makes you think that he's going to understand Mr. Maraj after school when that poor child is exhausted? But if you tell me as an intervention, additional classes after school with an alternative mathematics specialist, another teacher, another grade teacher maybe, or another class teacher, depending on how many teachers are teaching the same subject in a grade, then I can tell you, in terms of just changing that variable, the probability of Jacob understanding better will be better. So be smart, be realistic in the intervention that you try to use or implement to close the academic gap in terms of that challenge that you've identified. Responsible person. Now, the responsible person might not only be the subject teacher. The responsible person might also be maybe the LTSM coordinator. This is the example I used yesterday. Let's say a challenge that you've identified in teaching Jacob is that homework is never done. That is the challenge for Jacob. Learner's homework never done. The intervention is obtain textbooks, because the child might not have his own textbook. And it's very difficult, especially if you have a school that's working on an alternate day, to use a textbook at home. And we know there are schools that are not resourced well. So there's not even a possibility of photocopying that textbook for that kid. So the responsible person over and on top of the educator can be the LTSM coordinator, who should be in a position to obtain enough textbooks for Jacob or any other learner that requires a textbook. Because we know that these kids need to be kept busy even when they are at home. And without a textbook, it's very difficult. So that's an example I'm using. Time frame. Now, be realistic. Depending on the type of intervention that you are planning to use to close that academic gap with the challenge that you've identified, be realistic in terms of how long do you need as an educator to assist this child. It can be a week, it can be a month, it can be a term, it can be the entire year, but be realistic. So an ISP is an individual support plan. It's a plan. Now that I've identified my learner at risk, specifically Jacob, this is my plan that I'm planning to implement during the course of the time period for every challenge. Every challenge and every intervention might have a different time frame, but that is your plan. Now, the same applies to a subject improvement plan. As an educator, you need to develop a subject improvement plan. It doesn't matter even if last year you received 95% as an average and 100% pass rate in your subject, in whatever grade. What happened to the other 5%? You plan to achieve that 100% subject average, that 100% pass rate, maintain what you've achieved. So it doesn't matter how badly you perform as a subject or how well, you still need to develop this document. And this is something that curriculum will ask you for, circuits will ask you for, and in certain cases, even provincial office will ask you for. So, colleagues, you use the same structure, the same format that you would use for the individual support plan. But in this case, you are basically taking into consideration that entire grade or an entire class that you are teaching in a particular subject within a particular grade. Now, if Maraj is the grade 4 English teacher and the grade 6 English teacher, it means that Mr. Maraj needs to develop 2 separate subject improvement plans, because there are 2 different grades, 2 different ATPs, POAs. There are 2 different sets of learners that are sitting in front of me in those classes. So you cannot develop one subject improvement plan across a phase if you are teaching that subject in more than one grade. So just remember that. The second thing is, or now the third thing is, these documents are working documents. They should be developed at the end of the year. So come the beginning of the next academic year, you already planned, because you know who your learners at risk are already. Those NP learners, those PG learners are learners at risk. Start implementing your plan. And the idea is that the number of challenges that were put in your plan should be eliminated come the end of the year, or it should be reduced. We're not expecting you to work a miracle to completely get rid of all of your challenges, but there should be progress from term 1, 2, 3, and 4 There should be progress in terms of removing those challenges, improving your pass rate, improving your subject average. Whether you are working with an individual support plan or whether you are working with a subject improvement plan. Do you have a plan? Yes, I have a plan. Now, in executing that plan, that's the most important thing. So I want to tell you just there, it's a lot of work. It is really a lot of work, but I'm saying it again, back to basics. If you do the basics correctly and you know your subject, you are the master of your subject. You are the professional in your class in that subject. And if you know your ATPs and your POAs and you plan for lessons, you're ready for those kids. I'm telling you now that the number of learners at risk that you've identified is to a minimal, and the planning is going to be to a minimal, provided the basics are in place. Now, colleagues, whatever you do or select as an intervention, there needs to be proof of implementing your intervention. It's all good and well that you now planned to support these learners at risk. But now Mr. Maraj wants to see as a district official, yes, ma'am, sir, I see that you have a SIP, I see that you have an ISP for this learner or these groups of learners. But let's see now, in terms of the interventions that you've discussed in your plan, where is the evidence that you've actually implemented them? And this is where schools come short. They develop such beautiful documents that are so nicely structured, but there's absolutely no implementation thereof. Colleagues, I said this 2 weeks ago and I'm saying this again. The primary source of intervention is the learner's notebook. Don't let there be a case where there's an additional resource book or support book. And then when the HOD or the deputy or the principal or a district official, provincial official comes and opens the learner's notebook, there's no red pen up till today, the 13th of August. But now the child has a support book. It makes absolute no sense. Focus on the notebook, the interaction between the teacher and the learner in that notebook. And taking into consideration the back to basics, there should be structured lessons, date, heading, examples, definitions, summary, evidence of teaching and learning activities. Then there should be informal activities administered to learners. Furthermore, there should be feedback in terms of the answers of those formal activities given to the learners. Learners are marking those informal activities in pencil. After that, there should be evidence of the teacher actually controlling that pencil marking, because we know our kids. Right answers are marked wrong. Wrong answers are marked right. Some of them don't even take down the corrections. Some of them, even if they have everything right, they don't even tick. So the control is to actually allow the educator to have that interaction with the learner. And as an educator, policy dictates you only control 10% of every informal activity that you administer to a learner. 10%. And in controlling, you will pick up all of these mistakes that learners might do. And you might even be that educator to say, 2 plus 2 is not 5. I said 4. So you tick in red pen or you cross and you write the correct answer. That shows that you've actually had a one-on-one interaction with that notebook, which means you had an interaction with that learner. There should be evidence of support in that notebook. Maybe you've given the kid additional work over and on top of what was planned for that lesson. So that evidence will be in the book. So the learner will just write a heading additional activities. It's support. It is an example of support. You must also understand that the learners might not understand a major topic. Let's say it's, I'm going to use mathematics as the example. Let's say the learners are in grade 3, mathematics, they don't understand subtraction. And when you are marking that informal activity in pencil and you control the books, you realize majority of my class doesn't understand, or majority of the grade doesn't understand subtraction. So as an educator, the next day, you need to stop the bus, like I said earlier, and go back and reteach. Your heading will be, so it's a date, it's the heading, subtraction, subheading, reteaching. Then you have a complete new teaching and learning activity with examples and definitions, etc., with new informal activities, not the same informal activities, but adjusted informal activities. Expose them to something new. But no one can question you and say, how have you supported this child? You have supported the child because, ma'am, sir, I have a structured lesson. I've planned for my lesson. I've given them examples. I've given them definitions. I've given them feedback. They've marked in pencil. I've made sure by controlling 10% of every informal activity. When I found that kids didn't understand as a whole or as just an individual child, I've given additional opportunities, additional activities. I've retaught. Here's my reteaching. Here's my heading. The interaction in that notebook is priority. Please, colleagues, as a good practice and from experience, the notebook is very, very important. Going further, I want to talk about supporting further support, but more specifically to make an investigation or a practical. You give learners instruction. Let's say the instruction is make a kite, just using an example. Now, do you give the learners the rubric, or do you wait until they submit that kite to mark? By giving the learner the instruction with the rubric, you are supporting that learner because you are giving that learner exactly the guide as to how you are going to mark the making of that kite. Because you might have poor Alice that will make the most beautiful kite. But in terms of the rubric that you are using to mark that kite, the child can not meet the requirements. So by providing the child with the instruction and the rubric in advance, you are trying to support that child in put the child in a better position to understand exactly what is required from you, as well as for the child and the parent to assist this child in completing the task. So take that into consideration, colleagues, especially for languages also, whether it's a speech, prepared, unprepared reading. What is the rubric? What is the instruction? And here's the rubric. Let them prepare better. That is evidence of support. When you give learners a written test, do you give them the answers when you give them back their paper? Or does Joel get his paper back and see, but I've got 10 out of 20. Where did I go wrong? Colleagues, give the learners the memo to that paper once you give them the marked paper back. Let them see where they went wrong. Let them, in pencil, write down the corrections. That is called corrective teaching. It is evidence of support. So that when Joel comes to a mid-year test or the end of the year school-based test exam, and the question appears again, then he does better than he did initially, because now he knows where he went wrong, because my teacher supported me in giving me feedback as to the mistakes that I have made. Another type of support. Remember, when I'm talking about types of support, this is interventions that we discussed earlier that you can use in your ISPs or your subject improvement plans. I'm just giving you a few examples of interventions that you can use with regards to a challenge that you might identify. So the next one is breaking up of a task. If there's a test that's 50 marks, nothing stops you from breaking up that task into 2 different activities to make those activities still a test, 2 tests, but you've broken up one task into 2 activities, 25 marks maybe and 25 marks. Now, in supporting these learners, what are you doing? You are teaching to assess, but you are assisting them in that instead of studying for so much of information, they now get teaching and learning. They write the first activity. Teaching and learning, they write the second activity, which comprises of the whole task. You are giving them less information to study, giving them a better chance of passing, while the information is fresh in their heads. We are dealing with kids, and primary school kids. I'm not saying give them the questions beforehand, but as best as we can, that is a type of support that we can administer to them to facilitate them or giving them the best opportunity to pass. And it can be done because SASAMS also allows you to insert columns in your mark sheets. So you can break down tasks into or bigger tasks into smaller activities. And a lot of people will say, but Mr. Maraj, it's so much of marking. Colleagues, it's actually not. And in doing this, you will see that down the line, you are actually making less work for yourself while still supporting those kids. So you are killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Communication is key. Communication is key. I've identified my learners at risk. I've planned to support. I've implemented what I've planned to do. Everything that you plan to do as an intervention, you must have evidence readily available. Notebook is the primary source of support. So that's the first place anyone will look to see if you are supporting a child. Communicate to the parents. Very important on a termly basis and not just via a report card. On a formal school letterhead, not via WhatsApp. If you do via WhatsApp and all of these social media platforms, those are additionals to a formal report to a parent. Remember, WhatsApp is not a formal means of communication. So send home a letter, call the parent to school, sit down. Your child has been identified as a learner at risk. These are the reasons. According to my SIP, according to my ISP, this is how I intend to support your child. Let them sign. That is evidence that you've communicated with the parent every term, so that when the end of the year report card comes and the child doesn't meet the requirements, the parent doesn't appeal because you have a leg to stand on. But you don't have a leg to stand on if you identify the learners, plan to support, but there's no evidence of implementation. Okay. In closing, I want to remind you that we've spent so much of time on identifying these learners at risk and supporting, planning and supporting these learners at risk. What about Mbali there, the back of the class, always excelling? Do we forget about her? We must never forget about the learners that are excelling in our subjects. We need to give them the best possible opportunity to expand their minds more so that 95, 96% that they may be obtaining in our subject becomes 100. Because we know when Ambali takes that report card home, 95% in maths, mom and dad will still ask, what happened to the other 5%? I know it happened to me. And it's not nice. But when you are in the classroom and you are marking books and you're having that one-on-one with the learners, give learners like Mbali other resources. Nothing tells you to stick to the textbook that you are using. Speak to other colleagues from other schools. Your neighboring school might be using the very same subject, a different textbook. Swap textbooks. Let that be an additional resource, a support book for a child like Mbali, but also a child that is at risk. Keep those learners busy in the class. Let them write down the heading, additional work. So it shows that you are also supporting those learners that are excelling to help them to excel even more. Communication is key, colleagues. Don't have a one-track mind of just one resource. Use a variety of resources as much as you can in supporting those learners. When you are in the classroom and you're done with your teaching, sit at your desk. From one side, let the learners come to you. Mark their books, discuss with them. You don't have to have your books marked every week. You need to show that there's a progression of marking. There's a consistency of marking and control that's happening in the class. So depending on how much you are or what you are teaching, how many periods you have in a week, by the end of the week, you should have marked that entire class's books. And if not, it's not a train smash. Then you continue the next week. But is there a progression in your marking? There should be. Not find that the last time a red pen has been in that book was March of 2021. That is wrong. Group your learners. Your weaker learners, group them with the academically stronger learners in the class. Peer assistance. That is a type of intervention that you can use to support those learners. Bring the weaker learners to the front of the class. Let them be right there in front of you, interacting with you. Group the learners that are the weaker, academically weaker learners. Group them together. And at least once a week or alternate day, sit with them in the class and give an extra few minutes to them, but let whatever you do with them, let it be embedded within the notebook to show that you as the teacher have sat with those learners and you have interacted with those learners. That is also an intervention, a type of intervention support that you can use. So I'm just sharing ideas that I know work within the district that I am in. And I know that a lot of you are thinking, why am I not going further? Remember, there are other learners with deeper underlying non-academic issues, psychological, physical barriers. But that is something for another day. My session or this session is based on scholastic support. So I'm trying to keep it simple. And I want to remind you of the basics so that if we do the basics well and plan well, we can execute well. You might be sitting there and you might be thinking of other ways of supporting your learners at risk. That's fine. There are many other ways. But unfortunately, I only have this time to share with you. And I'm done. So I look forward to any questions or comments that might come my way, and I will at best try to answer them. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ike. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Trishen. I was just busy taking notes here. However, I'm also going to listen back. But I like the part where you talked about, the interaction with the educators and the learners. You talked about progression marking. You talked about pulling the learner in. You talked about, the use of the red pen on the notebook, and you specified also the notebook amongst other things that you have said. I'm looking at the chat here and I'm looking at conversation. Colleagues, this is, we're in the Q&A, and I would like you to please ask those questions. I think people were also carried, they were really paying attention, and because I really also didn't want to be distracted. So I guess that's why they were not asking questions. But colleagues, this is your time to ask your question. Remember, you can engage with the Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you want your question to be live. We can give you the access to please ask your question. So any questions, comment, contribution, it depends. Is it something that you're willing to try? It's best practice. Is there something with what Trishan has said that is a bit confusing that you need clarity on? The time is now by. While I'm waiting for the question, I'm quickly going to launch the poll. Colleagues, we need your feedback. In the polls that has been launched, please take our time to respond to the polls, as you remember that we always take the feedbacks from the poll in planning for subsequent sessions. Something also is telling me that, there is a need for, bringing Trishan back. I'm just, I know he's busy. I know we took our time to plan for this. And yeah, and I must say, thank you so much, Trishan. Colleague, you don't want to understand the times we had, when planning for this. He was inundated with work, and we had meetings, not even, after close of his business in the wee time of the night. So I want to thank him for taking his time, allocating time to have that session to make sure that we had this webinar come to pass and this webinar happen. Colleagues, please take our time to fill the polls. If you have questions, comment, contribution, this is the time to air that question. I see a chat. I'm just going to, all right, Rosemary is saying, I'm happy with how you explained evidence of support, especially allowing learners to write corrections in pencil on their scripts. Thank you. So thank you so much, Rosemary. That is showing that whatsoever was said here was captured fully. I also took notes, so it's not just people that I also am an attendee here. So I also took note because this is very important and we cannot sharing these best practices. Any question, comment, contribution? The time is now. It will be well appreciated. My eyes are also on the time. I don't want us to be over to have the session over the time. We have 8 minutes to the end of the session. I'm also keeping an eye at the polls. We have 34% already. So please, I encourage you to engage the poll. If you have any questions, comment, contribution, please, the time is also now. I'm just going to go to the next slide where we actually put up the information of our Triple-D provincial project managers. If you need more information on this or how to get across the recording and every other thing, please engage with the provincial manager. I see a question. Nungisi says, what I like is that of sticking to basics. Thank you so much. So these are pointers, these are pointers. I also pointed mine about the progressive market, the interaction between the educator and the learners, and also the use of the notebook. Thank you so much, Nungisi. What I like is that sticking to basic. Another comment here is, oh, okay. Thank you so much. I'm still waiting for your questions, comment, contributions. while you are also engaging with the polls. I'm also looking at the time. 48, 49%. Thank you so much. I can see that people are actually engaging with the polls. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate. Um, any questions, comment, colleagues? What is that thing that stood out for you in the course of this 1 hour? What is that one thing that stood out for you? I've heard from Rosemary. I've heard from Nungisi. There's one thing that stood out for each and every one of them. My question to you is, what is that one thing that stood out for you? Do you have a question? Do you have a comment? Do you have a contribution? The time is now. All right, I can see that we are sitting at 50%. Please engage with the polls, colleagues. Also, please register for our next webinar. Also, you think this session will be appropriate for some couple of people, please direct them to our Triple D help desk. I'm looking at the time. Maximela John is saying, can you please explain corrective teaching? I'm looking at the time, 5 minutes. Trishen, would you be able to do that? Can you please explain corrective teaching?
Okay. Thank you, RK. So, Mr. Matimela, corrective teaching, when you administer a written task to learners and you are done marking that task and you hand it back to them so that they can check what they've achieved, give them the memo. That is feedback. Let them in pencil mark or write the corrections for the questions that they have gotten wrong so that they can see where they've went wrong. Especially, you can do it for an exam or a school-based test as well, but the tasks that build up to a mid-year test and the tasks that build up to a end of the year school-based test exam, so that they don't make the same mistake again. Basically, giving them the answers to a written formal task is called corrective teaching. Giving them the answers after you've marked and you're giving them feedback, not giving them the memo with the task. So you'll be surprised at certain things that I found at times. So that is, in a nutshell, corrective teaching. I hope I've answered you, sir.
Thank you so much, Trishen. Also, we've gotten also feedback from Marlene. Marlene says the ISP addition to the SIP was very enlightening. Thank you so much, Marlene. There's a question from Simon. With the questions that I'm seeing, there's every possibility that Trishen will definitely going to be pulling you back again. And also in our webinars, we also track participation. So if a topic is well attended and well requested for, there's a need to have that topic again. So please, I'm going to be contacting you. We might be pulling you back. From Simon, Simon is saying, on the point of giving learners marking memorandum or rubric, do we do it during formative or summative assessment? Thank you.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. Okay. So I'm looking at the question, IK, on the point of giving learners marking memorandum or rubric, do we do it during formative or summative assessment? The idea, especially with COVID implication, is that we give them the rubric with the instruction for all assessments that form part of the SBA and the year-end promotion mark. When it comes to the memorandum, it's the same thing. We give them the marking memorandum after we've marked that written test or task, and we give them their marks back. Then you hand them the memorandum with their task so that they can see what they've gotten wrong and they can see where they've went wrong so that they can do the corrections on their scripts. But yes, like I said, don't give them the memorandum with the question paper. We know we can make mistakes when it comes to photocopying. So be very, very careful. And then, okay, if you'll allow me, I see the next one there says, I would like to know how to support a grade 7 learner who cannot read. Now, in my presentation, remember I said there are deeper, further intervention strategies that we can discuss, but it is where we need to get other stakeholders involved. Now, my advice to ma'am would be, I hope it's a ma'am, I'm looking at it now. Where is that question? Okay, if you can help me to relocate that
Sorry,
question.
Trishen, I just took it out. Is Pumlani.
Okay. So in answering that question, my advice would be that if you have a learner in grade 7 that cannot read, which should never be the case, why was this not identified in grade 6, 5, 4, 3, 2? My advice would be to refer that learner to your SBST coordinator, who is your school-based support team coordinator, and they should be properly, adequately, appropriately trained by district and province to handle that specific case. It is a deeper lying support intervention that is required over and on top of what we discussed today during today's session. So I hope I've answered that question. Please get a hold of your SBST coordinator, because like I said earlier, there might be other challenges that a learner experiences, maybe psychological, emotional, and that cannot be assisted by the common, I'm saying common, educator in the classroom.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trishan. I see two hands up. I'm just going to attend to them before we wrap up. But before I attend to them, I just want to read the comment from Benny. Benny said, I was happy that he did not stretch the issue of not abandoning excelling learners, which is something not done. Thank you so much. I'm just going to give Razia opportunity to speak, and then Lenny. So after then we'll now wrap the session up. Razia, if you can hear me, please unmute yourself and please go on with your comment, contribution, or question.
Hello. I withdrew my hand afterwards because I think that my question is not specifically relevant to this session. I did appreciate the session. However, I have a problem with an administrator that is no longer available to do our dashboard work. So I need personal training for a new administrator to do that. So if you can communicate with me on that matter in a different forum, then that would be appreciated. Thank you so much for these weekly sessions. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Razia. This is the right session. So your question is relevant. But what I'll tell you is please engage with the help desk email. Send them an email with just exactly what you have to us, and you will be supported adequately.
Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Razia. I can see the other person has taken the hand up. Colleague, I want to draw the curtain here. Looking at the time, we have actually elapsed by 2 minutes. I want to say thank you so much, Trishen. I know there's a lot of questions from people. There's a possibility, a huge one, that we're definitely going to be calling you back. But I'm going to that conversation offline with you. I want to say thank you also to the attendees that take our time to join us. We never take your attendee here for granted. Your attendance here for granted. We appreciate it. We know you are actually busy individuals, and we hope that today's session is beneficial to everyone. Remember, we always say, what is the next call to action? What do we do next? What we need to do next is, maybe listen to this again and then start implementing. It's best practice. So if it's working, if it's going to work for you, please implement it, and also come back to us and share your success story. For my side colleagues, I want to say stay warm, have a nice weekend, and please adhere to the COVID regulation. Thank you so much, and see you same time, same platform with a fresh new topic next week. I'm going to hand over to Trishen for his final words.
Thank you, RK. I just want to say once again, Thank you for the opportunity in sharing the best practice. I just want to say to the attendees, if you took away at least one thing from today's session, then I'm happy. And that's what we need to understand when we work with our kids as well. If you can support a child with one thing, you have done so much and you don't even know it. You guys must have a great weekend. It's going to be a cold weekend. I see there's snow in the Van Rienens area. So be blessed, be safe. And yeah, I guess I'm going to see you again.